I really love thinking about living rooted, this like putting down deep, deep roots of self-awareness and self-compassion that allow us to kind of, sometimes we tip. If we envision a tree with nice, strong roots, we might sometimes tip one way or the other, but because we've deepened these roots, these strong roots, we're always going to kind of find our way back to wholeness. So we don't have to be so afraid even of when we do kind of we start, like tipping into anger or resentment or whatever. It's like some of that is just part of being human in a messy world.
I'm Casey Main, author, writer, and party girl turned spiritual junkie, and I'm dedicated to helping you better understand the most important and most complicated relationship you'll ever be in, the one you have with yourself. It's the only relationship that you're in for the entirety of your time here, and it affects every single aspect of your life. Yet it is the one most often overlooked. This podcast is here to help you explore that relationship, get to know yourself so you can accept yourself, heal yourself, and become a better version of yourself. So let's get to it. Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Better You podcast. I am your host, Casey Main. Thank you so much for being here. If you're new, welcome to the party. If you've been following along for a while, then just thank you for doing that. Thank you for sticking with me as I figure out this whole podcasting thing. I'm enjoying doing it. I just love the guests we've had on so far. Super excited for 2021. It is going to be an amazing year on the podcast. So I hope you all have been enjoying it as much as I have. As you know, I've kind of taken December off a little bit in that we're not airing new episodes. So this is the second show in our Best of series. Last week, we aired the number 4 most popular episode of the podcast so far. And today I am re-airing number 3. And I'm so excited that this one made the top 4 because today's guest is just someone I really look up to. So there's certain people in the writing space or in the podcast space that I keep an eye on and I find their work really inspiring. And Krista is a beautiful writer. I think I first discovered her writing and her blog, A Life in Progress, on the Optimal Living Daily podcast. Her writing is often featured there. And I went to her website and I signed up for her emails. I still get them to this day, and I'm typically an unsubscriber. I unsubscribe from just about everything. But I love her emails, and she's so authentic. She's very real. She doesn't sugarcoat anything. It's that great balance of recognizing that life is hard sometimes. Life is messy. The things we go through are difficult. We ourselves can be messy. Yet she finds like the beauty in that in a very realistic way, like not super, I don't know. You know how sometimes when people are like super positive and inspiring, depending on where you are in your life, you're kind of like, ugh, okay, I can't really hear that message right now. She finds a way to make things digestibly positive, if digestibly is a word. Definitely isn't, and I should know that because I'm a writer, but I'm making it a word on this episode. So I would highly encourage everyone to go to her website. I will link to it in the show notes and check out her work, check out her writing, sign up for her emails. They're definitely ones you won't unsubscribe from because her messages are just, they're very touching. And I found that a lot of times they are like eerily relevant to what I'm going on in life. So I was very honored to have her on the podcast. This was back, I want to say in around May, end of May, I believe. And then I'm not surprised that it made it in the top 4 because it's a great message. And I think it's a really important one for 2020 in general, considering the year we all have had. We've been faced with a lot of mess, whether it be in life and outside circumstances or just what those outside circumstances have kind of brought up within you and your relationships. I know I've definitely felt that. And then I also think it's really relevant for the holiday season, which is, this great time for gratitude and be merry and happy and family and all that. But let's be real, like sometimes all that time with family can trigger you and can bring up the mess, or maybe you and your family or your group of friends, like maybe you guys don't all agree on the many different issues we've faced this year. And so that causes for discomfort. Like, who knows? I think that there's a particular point she makes in this episode about, it's a tree analogy. So you guys have to listen to hear it. But that's something I've kept top of mind for a long time to help me, deal with the stuff that I go through. So I love this message to air again, and and specifically for this time of year. A couple previous episodes that kind of fall on similar lines, if you guys are needing to go kind of deeper into this concept of like self-compassion and staying rooted and being positive, check out episode 80, Balancing It All is Bullshit, with Casey Castro. She's also just very real about life. If you are a mother or a parent, I think that is a particularly relevant one for you. Episode 79, Finding Forgiveness and Healing, with Sarah Schulting-Krantz, is a really inspiring story, and she's just proof of our resilience, considering what she's been through, and then the forgiveness and healing she's been able to find specifically like out in nature, which if you guys have been listening to the show for a while, you know I'm a big proponent of that. Also, episode 75, Finding the Positive and Going After Big Goals, with Paralympic athlete Sydney Collier. Sydney is just amazing. I mean, talk about an inspiring story and keeping a positive and like self-compassionate mindset when life around you is just throwing you obstacle after obstacle. I mean, she is incredible. If you haven't listened to that episode, check it out. You will love her as much as I do. Like, I have no doubt about that. And then also episode 71, Transforming Your Mindset to Believe You're Enough, with Lise Wilcox. That's another really good one, just about, accepting ourselves, like the fullness and wholeness of ourselves. So, all right, let's just jump into today's rerun. A little bit more about Krista. Krista O'Reilly-Davi-Digui works as a writer and joyful living educator. Her mission is to help messy humans like herself quiet the noise of perfectionism, comparison, and fear, and show up fully, with joy and on purpose, to their imperfect and beautiful lives in every season. And in this episode, we discuss how to better understand your sensitivity and see that there is beauty in it, the importance of fully accepting ourselves, including the mess, pain, and discomfort that comes with growth, perfectionism and the different ways it can show up, how our struggles are actually tied in with our strengths, using curiosity versus judgment to see how nothing is inherently bad, how our different traits live on a spectrum of healthy versus unhealthy, and the importance of being aware of that, and then how being deeply rooted in self-awareness and self-compassion can help us stay grounded when we move along those spectrums, the difference and relationship between self-compassion, self-esteem, and self-worth, how self-compassion involves allowing all the emotions and all the messy parts of life, and finally, the power of both and instead of either or. I hope you guys enjoy it as much as I have and find insight that is particularly helpful as we navigate the holidays and kind of close out this crazy year. I wish you all nothing but self-compassion. All right, let's hear from Krista. Okay, so I wanted to start with just, I guess, I know this is kind of a complicated question, but like a little bit of your story and kind of how you came to starting A Life in Progress.
Okay. My story. So, well, I'll start with, because it just feels so big. I'll narrow it down. So I started in my 40s. So I joyfully homeschooled my kids and focused on building family and a nest. And, that was my primary dream. And I did that for a long time. But as I neared my 40s in particular, I felt a sense that it was time for me to pick up some some of my other, I don't usually call them dreams, but they're facets of who I am and the things that I long for and care about. And it was just felt like time to start picking up some of those things that sometimes as parents, we lay down for a season to prioritize something else. In this case, it was my family. So I went back to school at 40. It was a very, very challenging season of life. So it seemed really a ludicrous time for me to be going back to school. So I was in really horrific pain, awaiting a hip replacement that was needed because of a childhood disease. So I'd lived in chronic pain since childhood. I was homeschooling. My dad was dying. But I find that I live my life this way by a deep sense of intuition or kind of a gut. I'm very gut led. And I just knew that even if it defied logic on the outside, I was supposed to go back to school and just begin this process. So I already kind of knew, even as I was studying and kind of starting tentatively my work at A Life in Progress, I was very clear on my mission. And it is very much birthed from a place of offering hope and encouragement, or offering light to other messy, in quotation marks, messy humans like myself who have struggled hard in life. Sometimes they've had to make a very conscious daily choice to live, to learn to come to a place of self-acceptance, to understand that they're not just struggle, like they are strength and struggle, and then to keep showing up fully to life in every season. So that's what I've been doing for the past 4.5 years. I really only talk about things or write about things that I'm willing to walk out, that I have firsthand experience with, and I'm willing to practice and grapple with myself.
I love that. And that there's so many elements of that really speak to me, especially like in this like exact moment in time. And so I love that you didn't really start this work until, a little bit later in life. And I just think, what you said about sometimes as parents, you have to kind of lay down certain dreams or goals or initiatives, for a season of life. And it's just funny. I felt that choice for the first real time, probably just last week. I don't have children, but I'm in the most serious relationship I've ever been in. And we're starting to talk a lot of future stuff. And so I just, for the first time, felt kind of that pull between, okay, do what's best for, my family and the family I want to create, or can be able to continue down this path of dream pursuit, which comes with a lot of struggles and a lot of times a lot of financial struggles. So I appreciate your honesty in that. And I love that you mentioned intuition, because that's just like something that keeps coming up in different podcast conversations. Have you always been very intuitive, or is that something that kind of developed over time?
I think, like, looking back, I can see that I always was this way. I didn't have words for it. But I think from a very young age, I was this way. I think also I am a very highly sensitive person, this trait of high sensitivity, very attuned to suffering. And so I would say yes. And in the earlier years of my life, and honestly, I'm turning 40, I forget, I think I'm turning 49 soon. It's really been in my 40s, mostly that I owned that. And it's come up in so many different ways in my life, but I think it was a process of learning to trust that more and more.
Yes.
But I do definitely see it present in who I am from a really, really young age.
It's funny. There seems to always be this kind of tie between intuition and being very sensitive. A lot of people I talk to who are very intuitive also talk about being empaths or being very sensitive. And I had never really thought of that correlation before. But I guess it makes sense that if you are more open to, I guess, what life, the universe, God, whatever you want to call it, is showing you, then you're also open to maybe some of the more uncomfortable energies or experiences out there, and that's what maybe makes us sensitive, I guess, if that makes sense.
Well, I mean, the trait of high sensitivity, I think it's present in about 20% of the population. So it's actually evidence-based. And it can be now, studied, and it's becoming more and more talked about and applied in even like therapeutic settings and so forth. So I may be veering off, Casey, so feel free to pull me back if this isn't where you wanted to go. Okay. But something that really stands out to me is that those of us who have moved through the world, whether we've identified, because I don't necessarily identify as an empath, but often highly sensitive people are empaths. And whereas that trait I don't think there is an evidence base per se for that, but whatever, that's okay. We recognize it. We, identify with it. But anyways, I think that this sense of moving through the world really with this high sensitivity, actually, a lot of us struggle in life. We, because we can be so I'll just use myself as an example where from a really young age, I felt like I carried the weight of the world on my shoulders. I grew up in a social justice oriented family, and I was aware of the poverty in India and Africa. I was aware of the suicide rates and alcoholism in the neighboring Indigenous communities. I was always aware. My parents cared deeply about people. But I didn't know what to do with all of that emotion, all of those feelings. And so actually it can be really dangerous for some of us if we don't, in the sense where we can struggle with depression, anxiety, suicidal ideation, because we don't know what to do with this information or how to protect ourselves in a world that can feel kind of scary and harsh. And so what I really love is how more and more we're talking about this, and we have opportunities online to be sharing information with each other. And so hopefully the next generation will just grow up with permission to be who they are and an understanding of how to be operate in their gifting and also love themselves well, which might include having really strong boundaries around how much information comes into your life at a time, or whose voice you're listening to and things like that.
I agree with that. And I think my sensitivity was not so much I guess at the time when I was younger, I viewed it as the weight of the world, but it was like the weight of the world around me, of just kind of my immediate family and friends. Like I cared very much and was very sensitive in that regard. So I guess kind of, it's almost like a matter of perspective, like how big your world is depending on like what you're exposed to when you're young. That's very interesting.
Sure. And then your overall personality or wiring, right? Which part of that is sort of like the thing that drives us or motivates us. So I love the Enneagram. And so I would identify it as my dominant type as an Enneagram 1, wing 2. I'm not sure if you're familiar, if your listeners will be, but I'll just say that the 1 struggles a lot with perfectionism, not feeling good enough, but I have a strong drive to make the world better. And of course, this can sound different for every, person, even with that dominant type, and then every human in the world. But it can be helpful, though, to understand our deepest kind of motivation, what drives us, what lights us up. And then that can help us understand how we show up with that trait of sensitivity. And because it's so tied to our gifting, which I always will come back to, because I just feel like so many people go through the world so hyper aware of their perceived failings or struggles. Yes. Right. And I think we can do with a lot more reinforcement of this truth that you're not just struggle. You are, in fact, wired this way on purpose. Like, it's beautiful and it has these inherent gifts, and yeah, you're needed in this world.
Yes, I love that. And I mean, literally, that is something I wrote about and blogged about this morning. Has kind of been this realization of, because this podcast, The Better You, it's all about bettering yourself, better understanding, your relationship with self. And I want to better myself and blah, blah, blah. And that's all great. But it can be taken kind of too far and you talk a lot about perfectionism. And so I've just kind of started to come around to this realization that it's really very much like accepting who we are, still recognizing there's room for growth, but at the same time, and it's like you can do both of these things at the same time, which I think our brain has a hard time grasping, but like fully accept and love who you are in this current moment is like step number one in order to grow. But we seem to kind of skip over that step and only look forward at, the ways that we want to change or how we get over these things that we've uncovered as quote unquote bad that are in us or whatever. And I think that's one of the kind of pitfalls in the like self-development or personal development world.
Yeah, agreed. And I think it's in the spiritual world too. Like, it's in all these different realms where I think it's human desire to bypass and then it's promoted. Like, so even this sense of relentless positivity where we don't allow, or even like how our cultures in North America don't really allow for grief. This is a form of bypassing. We want everything neat and tidy. We want the quick fix. And it makes sense, because why would we choose pain for ourselves? Why would we choose discomfort? But the only way to real healing, real deep, emotional growth, becoming the whole, truest sense of who we are, there is no bypassing. It requires us to kind of go into the murky waters of discomfort and stretching and exposing and grappling.
Yes. Yeah, I completely agree. And I think that's one of those lessons that it's like you can know it on an intellectual level, but it's only when you really do it and walk through it, I think, that you fully understand it on the deepest level. Okay. So you oftentimes in your writing, you refer to yourself as like a recovering perfectionist, which I love, because I think, I don't know, probably a lot of us aren't even recovering. We're still very much in it. So talk a little bit about kind of what that perfectionism can look like, and then how we start to embrace the messy. And I know that's a big question as well. So we can kind of start wherever you want to start with that.
Sure. Well, so one thing that strikes me often is that, and I don't know if you find this in your work, Casey, but people are drawn to, so I don't always use even the term perfectionism. I might frame it different ways, but people are drawn to my work because largely I think they actually do wrestle with this, but they don't always know that. So if I poll people, they may not identify perfectionism as a top priority, like dealing with perfectionism a top priority, but they'll use different words to essentially describe their experience of living with this sort of sense of never being good enough, never quite being able to measure up or keep up, or this sort of constant raising the bar on themselves. And so, how we were talking before about sensitivity, this perfectionism doesn't always show up in the same way, right? It's going to, that's just one facet of maybe who we are or how we're showing up in the world. So it is going to look different for each of us. And again, I think that our root motivation in the world will impact how this shows up. So once again, I know I didn't know this in my younger years, but I do certainly recognize now that I really care deeply about making this world a better place, quote unquote better. And from my perspective, that means kinder, safer for every human. And so for me, perfectionism, it was so incredibly damaging. it looked like, I've already mentioned, like just no matter what I did, I knew I wasn't good enough. I tried to be good in the world. Like I really tried to find kind of the rules, like how to be a good mom. What does a good wife look like? All the things, and kind of jump through hoops. But I never could attain the standard. And even now, so I will, this is a little bit of an aside, but I don't actually believe that perfectionism ever, like if we have that trait, I don't think I think of it as putting it into remission. And then whenever we're stressed though, we need to be conscious of how we tip back into old patterns of behavior and thinking. So I think it kind of lives there, it simmers, and we need to always be conscious. So being a recovering perfectionist for me means living with this awareness. And also an awareness that, like, I really believe that our strength and struggle are completely tangled up. So the goal is never to crush or destroy or, some things in life we do, I think, want to uproot, like shame. Perfectionism, I think what can happen is that the more that we walk in self-compassion, the more we walk in awareness of our strength and struggle, we can use that facet of who we are for good. So a perfectionist, you probably want your surgeon or your pilot to have a pretty high standard, right? Yep. And certainly we see that certain people, like let's just say, certain musicians or athletes or whatever, or researchers, they might operate with this high standard that we totally can appreciate. In my case, I know that it's one of my strengths. I look around and I can see what can be made better. I can see, it could even be, so I'm working with clients, I can see where they have maybe old stories that are harming them. And I have this ability to see that. I can see where we might have leaky boundaries. Like this can all be used for good. Mm-hmm. So it's not so much about eradicating as it is, as the more we become whole and rooted and walking in self-compassion, we don't tip into kind of the lowest forms of this trait where it can lead to increased mental health issues, suicidal ideation, avoidance, disordered eating, self-loathing, things like that. I'll let you move us in the direction you want to go.
No, I love that. I'm curious as to your perspective on like, where do you think this like perfectionism comes from, or why are we so wired that it's like never enough? Is it just something that's deep rooted in us? Does it come from like comparing ourselves to, people we see on social media now, if you think about it, and these great athletes and all this stuff, like we have access and awareness of all these different people that are doing, what we see as quote unquote great things. And then we internalize that and think our life is not as good, or like, what do you think is going on?
I talk a lot about perfectionism, comparison, and fear. And I think so. So again, I don't think there is one way. I do think that sometimes it's okay. So I'm going to frame this from a perspective that I can't prove this, but I think this might be true. I do think that early childhood, so even having a perfectionist parent can certainly increase our likelihood of having this trait. But I think that we have a tendency to view things and judge things as bad. And I think it's interesting because I'm not convinced this is bad. I'm convinced that we just live in a messy world. So this trait, as mentioned, I think it actually is important. It can be used for good in the world. It's that we haven't always had like a lot of talk around self-awareness and these topics. Like I think our generation, I'm lumping us. I don't actually know how old you are.
Yeah.
So I'm just going to pretend we're the same generation.
Yeah, I kind of straddle millennial and Gen X, so I don't know where I fit. I think I have a foot in each.
Well, I think though you and we'd probably both see that more and more, access to information online, conversation around this kind of vulnerability, like we're only just talking about this now. Like my
Mm-hmm.
parents didn't have this information. They were not operating from this place. So I think what I want to say, and I feel like this can be counterintuitive, is that if we get curious and so we move more and more and more, and we try to explore this idea of curiosity versus judgment, what we might see is so many of the things that we immediately assume are bad. They came from somewhere. Was that trauma? Who did this to me? I think that if we view instead with curiosity, what we might see is that the trait itself is part of our wiring. It's beautiful. It's how we're taught to show up in the world. I feel like that's messy, like it's because it doesn't have a clear answer, but I'm more interested in looking at things like this so in the same way that we talked about high sensitivity, a child, so myself, I was suicidal at a young age. I struggled hard in life.
Wow.
But was it the fault? Was this trait bad? No, the trait is actually beautiful. It's a really beautiful part of who I am and how I have the gifts I bring to the world. So can it be learned and can it be reinforced, say, by a culture that's all about like winning or bigger is better? Sure, it can be, absolutely. But I really like kind of trying to reframe so that we understand that who we are is not faulty. It's like,
Yes.
yeah, and it's like this, it is messy because yes, there is hard, any of us, when we tip into extremes or when we're not walking in wholeness, whether we're talking about perfectionism or any other trait, it can look unhealthy, because it can be unhealthy, but inherently or at its core, it's not unhealthy. So
Yes.
yeah, okay.
Okay. I love that. And I absolutely love the curiosity instead of judgment. Cause I agree with you 100%. And this is something I've been kind of mulling over in my brain for a while now. This concept that we do label things or judge things as good or bad, but that's not, I'm not buying into that anymore because I agree with you that the more you look at something and get curious with it, like there is a lesson in it. There is good in it. And that can be a hard concept to grasp because you can think of all these, really painful or horrible things that happen. And then of course, our initial instincts be like, oh, that's bad. That's wrong. But I don't know. I feel on some deep level that the concept of good and bad doesn't hold so much water with me anymore. And it does take that level of curiosity and really digging into it and like opening our mind to be able to get to that place you're talking about of we're seeing like inherently like all the traits within us are good and like life is messy, but that doesn't mean it's bad.
Yeah. And like, just so like a couple like real life examples from where I am at life. That trait in me, if I'm at my healthiest self, can look like not settling for status quo because I believe things can get better. It's actually for me tangled up with a sense of optimism and also even just a skill around like I'm very ordered. I love my budget book. I'm generally like I don't pay bills like it's like these things where I can bring those gifts into an organization, into a volunteer opportunity. Like people need me, like other people have charisma and all these other strengths they bring, and I bring these other things. So it's good. When I'm not, so in just sort of a moderate state, we've walked through crises, like deep, horrible, really horrific circumstances as a family this past while. And I really need to be on the lookout for how that trait, though, when I'm weary and afraid, can tip into self-judgment or even just nitpicking. Like nitpicking, like my family they're messier than me or, things like that. And I need to be conscious of that. At its lowest and most dangerous form, it can look like severe depression, suicidal ideation, addiction, things like that, where you're trying to numb yourself, find ways of coping and feeling safe in a world when you just feel like I'm not enough and I'm never going to have what it takes and so forth. So it's like this spectrum. And and so it's like a form of softening in and of itself and living more gently when we just recognize all of these traits, like including high sensitivity, which we've talked about, they're all a spectrum. And it's not good or bad, but it's more, where can we find, I really love thinking about living rooted, this like putting down deep, deep roots of self-awareness and self-compassion that allow us to kind of, sometimes we tip. If we envision a tree with nice strong roots, we might sometimes tip one way or the other, but because we've deepened these roots, these strong roots, we're always going to kind of find our way back to wholeness. So we don't have to be so afraid even of when we do kind of, we start, like tipping into anger or resentment or whatever. It's like some of that is just part of being human in a messy world.
Oh, I love that. That framing is super helpful. Like the concept that it's a spectrum. And so to just be aware of that. Okay. Like, and so that allows you to accept all the different aspects of yourself, to be like, okay, maybe I have this trait of, we'll say perfectionism for just lack of another word. And to your point, like when it's, can be used for good, but I need to be aware of it and aware of myself on where it might tip me like off the scale. But at the same time, to your point, if you're really rooted in who you are and self-awareness, then even that tilt doesn't necessarily like completely throw you off, because you're accepting. It's like two levels. Like you accept your own messiness, which is the fact that, there is that spectrum. And then you accept that life is messy, which is going to create the tilting. Like you're going to tilt, and like both aspects of it are okay. I love that. That is like very, very helpful.
I'm glad. I wrote, so on my website, I have just 3 categories. People have categories for their blogs or whatever. My 3 categories are: you're imperfect, life is messy, show up anyway. That's kind of like my motto for like moving through this world.
Yes. Oh, I love that. Okay. So I'm curious then, how do you kind of keep that rootedness and that mindset? Especially, okay, so we'll start with like your business aspect. So, you're a writer, you're a coach, you're the online business, which is very, very popular right now, but it also sometimes comes with this extreme like hustle and grind mentality. Like you've got to do all the things, and there are so many things you could do with the internet and technology and all that stuff. So how do you stay, I guess, kind of just true to your work and true to that mindset, and in a healthy place of perfectionism, yet still be kind of like productive and successful on the business end of things?
Yeah. So, such a big, fun conversation. I talk, and again, like I'm always walking it out and practicing even as I support other people, right? Because life is not static. We are going to be thrown. I find that life invites me. I say that kind of nicely, but I'm sort of ticked off at life right now. I just keep getting opportunity after opportunity to practice what this looks, sounds, feels like when we're going through real life, which includes all sorts of really hard things. There's a couple different components that I'd like to touch on. One is this idea of building a sustainable life and business. So I really don't aim for success. It's not something that, I do think we can define it for ourselves. What does enough look, sound, feel like in the season? But really, I tend to approach life as like I kind of craft this life vision for myself. And that involves, first, it's not about accomplishment, but it's about identifying a sense of mission or purpose for my life or even this season. My identifying my core values, my highest priorities for this season, because like life is seasons, like it's not going to remain static. And then even I I use this idea that came originally from Danielle Laporte. She used the term core desired feelings. I think about kind of these mind, body, spirit intentions, and even so there's a lot of different facets, but I kind of start with this, the way that I craft a life vision, and I'll even help my clients work through this idea, is this sort of top-down approach where we don't focus on accomplishment, like, well, I have to do this thing and I have to do that. It's like all the micro steps or the how I'm going to show up. I start really from this place of, well, why? And I'm a questioner too. So this does come more naturally for me, but like, who do I want to be in the world? Mm-hmm. Why does this matter to me? Like, I don't just say yes to something because somebody else is doing it. I need to really question deeply and say, but why? Does this align to who and how I want to be, to my core values, to my priorities in this season of life? And if it doesn't, then I need to, as difficult as it may feel, my ego may come into play, fear of missing out might come up, and all the things. But because I'm walking with this awareness, I can loosen my grip on the noise and just keep my eyes on my own path and just take steps, little step by little step, towards this vision that I have for me and my life and my work. So there's all these like little threads in there that we could talk about, but that would probably be its own podcast episode.
Yeah.
But the other part of that I think is essential, like totally essential. And I'm not big into creating rules for other people, but like, I just believe that the research is there. I really believe this is 100% essential, is learning to walk in self-compassion. That I don't believe that, I think that unless we learn to be rooted or grounded in self-compassion, we are constantly going to be pulled to and fro by fads, by comparison, by a sense of trying to measure up or keep up to somebody else, to chasing success, somebody else's version of success, whatever, sacrificing our own deepest needs or wants or priorities for, pleasing other people, like all that stuff. I think that to do this work, to build a sustainable life and business, to live with purpose, health, and joy, we must find our way, like put down these roots of self-compassion.
So what does self-compassion look like to you, like in practice? Because it's one of those words that I understand what it means, like show ourselves more compassion, but like, how do we actually do that?
So Krista Neff is one of the leading kind of researchers in this. And she developed the self-compassion scale, which is widely used in research around self-compassion. So I'm going to just share her, sort of a broad, like it's not a word for word definition or whatever, but I'm going to use her because she's the expert on this. I want to use her terminology. Okay. I want to, so for people listening, if maybe they're less familiar with this, and maybe they've heard the word, but like they haven't ever really gone kind of deeper to explore it. I want to share some of the benefits or the risks involved. So, because it's powerful. Self-compassion increases self-worth, but it's very different from when people often talk about self-esteem. So in research, self-compassion is what actually increases self-worth, and it's less attached to specific outcomes. So that means that my worth is not dependent on a book deal. My worth is not dependent on a number of Facebook followers. Whereas when we're looking for self-esteem, it is often tied to these externals, and that's actually a problem. And that's where social comparison increases. So self-compassion decreases social comparison, public self-consciousness, self-rumination, anger, depression, and perfectionism. It increases happiness, resilience, and sense of agency, courage, or this ability to live with this both and perspective that we've not fully touched on, but it is tied up to everything else we have already been talking about, making room for both and in life. So the benefits of of doing this work, first and foremost, is like they are powerful. They are life-changing. And so that's my argument for looking into it deeper.
Love it. Sold.
Yeah. Okay, good. So Krista Neff says that there are 3 components of self-compassion, and they are mindfulness. So living mindfully, and that includes self-awareness. So an understanding of who and how we are right now. And our triggers, the ways that we might tip into sort of unhealthy patterns, and all of that, strength and struggle, all of it. The second component is self-kindness. And the third component is calm and humanity. And so if I was working with somebody, say, I wouldn't focus on building happiness or lowering perfectionism per se. I would focus on self-compassion, because the more that we deepen these roots of self-compassion, we automatically start living in greater self-acceptance, self-awareness. Our happiness increases, our physical and mental health increases. We develop resilience, which allows us, we were talking about like the tree tilting. Well, when the storms of life come, we tilt into times maybe where it feels very dark and very difficult. But we have this sense of agency and this resilience, which allows us to come back into wholeness, or to even stay rooted in wholeness, even as we're grieving and suffering. So those are the 3 components. So you go ahead. Like, if you want me to talk more, you can let me know.
Well, so I like those. Where I get a little bit tripped up though is like the third one. All right. So calm and humanity, like calm, especially. I love it. I get it. And I think similar to kind of what we talked about in the beginning of the conversation, that the personal development world, and especially like the spiritual world, can sometimes want to not allow like the quote unquote negative emotions, the uncomfortable emotions. And it's almost like you're supposed to rise above that. And so I've been recently like grappling a lot with, and this came up in a recent podcast episode of, like anger. And I've realized like I'm not comfortable with the feeling of anger, in that, like, I don't think I've fully like integrated it and accepted it into my being. I never really feel anger. I don't express that. But when other people do, it makes me feel very uncomfortable. And so for a while I had been living in this kind of, oh, I'm just above anger and this person isn't, type like holier than thou approach, instead of looking at it as, if this is making me uncomfortable, then it's maybe work I need to do. Like, I haven't made peace with that emotion. So how do we kind of keep that calm element and that self-kindness, yet also allow ourselves to feel and like validate those not so calm or kind emotions that are just like a part of life?
So it's actually common or shared humanity, not calm.
Oh.
Yeah. So common humanity, which means that we all have these emotions. You're not bad for having them. You are,
okay.
If you suffer. Yeah. So
that makes more sense.
Yeah. And it's actually so it creates this sense of connection to everybody else in the world and belonging, and sense that if you grapple with life, if you suffer, if you struggle, you're not unique in that. We all, like, our life circumstances look different, but I don't think any human being is going to get out of this world unscathed. Like, we will walk through loss. We will be challenged. We will witness bad things, like unfair things. And then we're going to need to choose our response. And one of our responses, if we're talking about our own humanity, let's say that, that involves anger. One response would be that mindfulness or awareness to recognize what's up. We might, with practice, be able to just sit with that as opposed to judging it or running and numbing from that anger. We might make space to explore. We might recognize that it does exist in us, even if we haven't identified, and this is how it shows up. We might then also, practice self-kindness, where we can, even just our self-talk, right? It's powerful. So when we notice the anger, and even if we don't like it, we're judging it in the moment, whatever, we might just begin to talk, like I do this a lot, and just say, Krista, hon, like you're doing a great job. So Casey, like, you know, my son ended his life just over 6 months ago. We've walked through stuff that nobody should ever have to walk through. And he walked through stuff no human should ever walk through. So I do a lot of this, reminding myself when I am in despair, Krista, you are doing an amazing job. Or I might even say, you are allowed to feel rage right now, because I don't just feel anger, I feel rage.
Yeah.
I am allowed. It makes sense. Anybody who had to go through this, so it is a practice, and it's actually not that difficult to begin integrating self-compassion boosting practices into our life. You know, it might look like a short meditation. It might look like a phrase or a mantra that just reminds us that we're allowed to be where we're at. You know, there's all these like little teeny practices that we can integrate into our life, but they're not actually complicated, costly, or difficult to integrate. But what can help is understanding why this matters. So like all of the science around it, and then to have somebody maybe give you 1, 2, or 3 little ways that you can begin practicing. And we actually do build these muscles. You know, we rewire our brain even, so that let's say our brain has a habit of going right into storytelling about our future. You know, this one thing means I'm bad. I'm never going to, you know, overcome this particular habit or whatever. Instead, we start to rewire that. And it's really, it's attainable and accessible for everybody, which I love.
Yes. And I guess that's where, you know, the both and concept to come in. So we can sit in and, like you said, allow ourselves to feel these uncomfortable emotions, whether it be grief or anger, while still then showing yourself the self-compassion of like, yes, you know, you are grieving right now. You're still doing a great job. Like, yes, you are angry right now. It's okay to be angry. So it's like that both, rather than trying to kind of tell yourself like, oh, Casey, you don't need to be mad. Like, it's totally fine. Like, everything's fine, blah, blah, blah. It's allowing the anger and the, I guess, kind self-talk, like reassuring myself that it's okay to feel that, almost like we would to a child who's feeling some kind of feeling, you know, almost like validating their feelings, not trying to like logic them out of it.
Yeah, it is sort of this idea of holding space for ourselves and for other people. But like, since we're talking about self-compassion, it's, you know, really learning to hold space for ourselves, create a safe container for ourselves to feel, to be in progress, to hurt, and also see that there's beauty in the world at the same time. You know, so that both and, like, that to me is one of the most healing and beautiful concepts that I've ever like picked up for myself, because it just, that alone, I think, makes room for, so a few examples would be, let's say I have a habit that I don't love, and I see that it's not necessarily moving me towards who and how I want to be, you know, or my life vision. But breaking a habit, building a new one can take time. We can, you know, fall down. We need to pick ourselves up. So in that moment, let's say where there's this thing that I don't really like, and I do want growth or healing or whatever, both and allows me to say, yeah, you fell again, and I'm so proud of you because you're not quitting. It can mean that in the deepest, darkest season of grief and pain, that I can tell the truth about my grief and my anger and the horror that I feel. And also I see that my whole life is not bad because there's also suffering in it. I have a lot of beauty in my life. I can still show up with purpose to every single day. There might be days where what I really need to do, and I actually do this, is put myself to bed at 2:30 in the afternoon because the feelings are too much. So I don't run or numb, but I just tend to myself. And I mean, I'm coping, but I'm not doing something destructive, you know? And I just make space for that, because right now that's what it looks like to walk through the thick wilds of grief. It can look like somebody really ticking us off or hurting us, and also seeing that it doesn't mean that person is bad. It doesn't even mean that maybe I need space from a particular relationship, but it doesn't necessarily, it may even make space for me to just wait and see, live the questions. Rainer Maria Wilk, I'm not sure if I pronounced that name correctly, but writes about living the questions now. So both and allows us to just not have to always rush to a conclusion, and just allow space to be and to wait and see.
Oh, I love that. That is beautifully said, and really the perfect note to end on. I want to close out just with asking you who some of your favorite or most impactful teachers have been. So you mentioned Kristen Neff. Are there others that you feel like have had a profound impact on like your life and your work?
I mean, I'm not always honestly that great at remembering names. Like I am so grateful for all the people who have shown up with courage to use their voice in the world. And I know I've benefited from so many people, but I don't necessarily think like that way. Like, but I can, let's say a couple that come to mind, like who I remember core transitional phases in my life. So Brene Brown, like seems obvious, but like totally, like, of course, like, and back, about 6-ish years ago when I was in, I was actually that phase that we started the podcast talking about, where I was going back. I mean, I guess it was in the phase where I was studying, my dad was dying and all that stuff. Byron Katie, her book. Yeah. Like so interestingly, I really do think she had a profound effect on me, and got me thinking at a time where I desperately needed a new way of seeing in sort of a dark season. Her book, Loving What Is, was really helpful to me. And it's interesting because I don't agree with everything at all. And I think this is cool. We can glean from each other and the wisdom and we don't have to agree with everything. So I definitely don't agree with everything that she teaches or believes. And also I just have really benefited from her work. And it was at a really important season in my life. Gosh, I don't know. I can't think of other names, but I love to read and glean and, ponder. And I know that I've just benefited from so many voices. Oh, actually, I'm going to say, so Parker Palmer, he has this little book. I've read it twice and I know I'll read it again. It's called Let Your Life Speak. Ooh. I loved that little book too. It's funny because I don't even remember. It's a short book. I don't even remember everything in there, but what I do remember is he shared about his dark night of the soul and finding his way forward. And I know it has impacted me. Like this idea of like listening in, trusting ourselves, and this idea of listening to our life speak. What that means to me is like not trying to walk in somebody else's shoes, not trying to be or sound or look like anybody else, but trusting that like we're all knit together in beautiful ways. We all have gifts to share, and we are safe. This is something like, because I feel like we're taught often to trust the expert, the guru, and I'm like, I just hate that. I'm like, yes, glean from somebody else, but never, never, never let somebody else be the expert of your life.
Yes. Oh, I love that. Like, yes, it is important. I think not necessary, but can be very beneficial to look to other people's thoughts and works and teachings and writings and conversations to maybe spark your brain in a direction that it hasn't gone on its own. But 100%, like take what resonates with you and leave the rest, and ultimately like trust yourself and like your your intuition, like for your own life, versus really just place it in the hands of another teacher or a religion or whatever it may be, and be like, here, I'll do what you say.
Exactly. Yeah.
Wonderful. Okay. Well, thank you so much for coming on. I was so looking forward to talking to you. I absolutely love your writing. As you saw when I sent you some of the pre-questions, I file certain emails of yours away because they've just really spoken to me, and you have a beautiful view of the world. And I so appreciate you coming on and sharing it with everybody. Tell everyone where they can find your work and your writing and follow you and all that good stuff.
Sure. Well, thanks, Casey. And thank you for your patience, because it took us a while to actually be able to make this happen.
That is absolutely okay.
So my website is alifeinprogress.ca. And one of my favorite places right now to connect with people is inside my Brave and Beautiful membership. I keep it fairly capped at 50 women. And that's where I really am loving the way of building relationship and going deeper into some of these ideas. Like, I love my client work. I genuinely love my work. I'm so grateful. But this is my first year with having started the Brave and Beautiful membership, and it's a place that I really do enjoy and appreciate. So that's, you can find that at alifeinprogress.ca.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Okay, that'll do it for today's episode. Thank you again so much for listening. Make sure you are subscribed so you don't miss number 2 and number 1 of our Best Of series. And then we're going to close out the year with a solo episode where I'll share kind of my favorite takeaways and lessons learned as we move into a new year. And then 2021 is just going to be an amazing year full of all kinds of interesting and insightful and inspiring guests. So hit that subscribe button if you are not already subscribed. If you've been enjoying the podcast, I will absolutely appreciate a rating or review on whatever platform you're listening. That is always helpful. And be sure you are following us on the socials. We are on Instagram and Facebook at The Better You Podcast. All right, that's it. I hope you guys have a wonderful rest of your day and a fabulous week.